Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
Welcome to Crosspoint.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
There's a world at war, caught in suffering, silent casualties. God grant us peace in these sleepless nights. I can hardly breathe despite brutality. I know that we'll be free. I know that we'll be. So let the light in, keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free.
In these desperate times, love will hold us here. Love will join our hands, teach us to have no fear. So we'll lay our down to wash their feet when we see our sister. Oh, we'll all be free. Oh, yes, we'll all be free.
So let the light in, keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. So let the light in, keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. We will all be free. Free, free, we'll all be free. We are 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 free, free, we'll all be free. Let the light in, keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. Let the light in, keep it shining, let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. We will all be free. We will all be free. We will all be free.
Hey, good morning, Crosspoint. So good to gather with you again today. So a few things I want to mention up front before I offer you an update for Crosspoint as we start journeying through 2021 together. On this coming Tuesday night at 6:30, we'll be gathering for Theology Uncorked. If you're interested in connecting with some other people from Crosspoint and engaging in some good conversations online, this Tuesday night we'll be discussing what does it actually mean when we say, I believe in God. So it's definitely a good conversation to have. All respectful perspectives and opinions are welcome, and we'd love to have you there. If you want more information, you can go to our website, crosspoint.org/theologyuncorked. Furthermore, another opportunity to connect is through our winter groups. And winter groups are groups that will meet anywhere from about 4 to 8 weeks, and they'll be covering a wide range of conversations from race to gratitude to Enneagram and all sorts of stuff in between. And so if you're interested in connecting from wherever you are located around the world, today is the last day to sign up. And so again, you just go to crosspoint.org/winter-groups and you can find out all the information you need to there and register. Then as always, if you want to contribute financially to all that we're doing together, to love and to serve people, believing we can do way more together to make a significant impact than we can do individually on our own, then you can go to crosspoint.org/contribute. Lots of different ways you can contribute there, whether check, credit card, stocks, PayPal, etc. And then you can text the word crosspointenc to the number 77977, and a secure link will be sent to your phone, and you can always contribute that way as well. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to take a moment to update us all on as a community. Several months ago, I shared that we didn't have plans to regather in person on Sunday mornings through the end of 2020, and that we would continue to evaluate things from there. And so, here we are in 2021, and I wanted to let you know that for the foreseeable future, at least through the spring of this year, we don't see that changing. And while I recognize people have a lot of different opinions on this topic across the country, here's the most simple of realities. Here in North Carolina, we're under a directive of the top health experts in our state that, in case you haven't seen it, it says this: only leave home for essential activities such as going to work or school, for healthcare purposes, or to care for family members or to buy food. Avoid gathering with people who you do not live with, and stay away from crowds. Avoid places where people may gather in large numbers. So, we've said from the beginning that we'll listen to science, listen to medical experts, and try to discern together as leaders of this community what is in the best interest of the entire Crosspoint community. And to be clear, by that I mean the actual people in our community, not the organization. And the medical experts and the data continue to indicate that things are still going to get worse before they get better with this pandemic. And so we want to do everything we can possibly do to love one another and the people that we all interact with. And so using that wisdom, the conclusion was pretty obvious for us. Now, I'm sure that decision isn't very surprising to those of you who have been journeying with us for any length of time, but I still wanted to make sure it was clear. Lastly, I wanted to take a moment to speak primarily to those of you who have started journeying with Crosspoint really only in the last 10 months since we moved all of our major gatherings online. It's been one of the great and unexpected joys of this past 10 months to hear from many of you in different cities and different states and different countries all over the world. But here's what I want to make clear. While there hopefully will be a day when those of us local to the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina will be able to gather in person in some way here again, what I want to make sure you know is that our online experiences, our online services, online groups, etc., those aren't going away when that time comes. And furthermore, we don't envision gathering together in person locally here, but then just sticking a camera in the back of the room so it feels like you're just observing something secondhand that is going on for a different group of people that you're not actually a part of. From the beginning of going online, we wanted to create experiences that were designed for people participating from their homes, where any music, videos, art, or teachings were designed specifically for that setting. Again, not simply observing something that was designed for an in-person gathering. And that's one of the things I've been most proud of that all of our teams have worked so hard to create over these last 10 months. And so I just want you to know that wherever you are in the world, if Crosspoint has become a community that you want to journey with, and if there's any part of you that's like, well, you know what, I don't know if I should just kind of let my heart fully go in, or I don't know if I should get involved too much because this point of connection will probably just go away after the pandemic's over, I just want to assure you that's not the case. Wherever you are in the world, you're Crosspoint. We see you as an important, critical part of this community and want to discover all the ways you make us a better and more beautiful community together. And so we don't have any idea really exactly how everything will look like moving forward, but what we do know is that we aren't thinking about how do we go backwards to what was. Rather, all the conversations are about moving forward with our online community being a vital part of who we all are together. This morning, Tirza is going to be walking us through some insights on how our words create the spaces and the realities around us. And with everything going on in our world lately, I'm confident it's going to be really helpful and timely for all of us. But before we get to Tirza, we want to share a song with you that helps to set up the vision of how we hope to love in this community. Because obviously this has been a wild few weeks in our world. And yet, while all these national events are being reported 24/7 on the TV and the internet, social media feeds, our day-to-day lives in our individual worlds hasn't stopped. Right? We've had medical emergencies and relational emergencies. There's been loss. There's been different crises, fears and joys that have absolutely nothing to do with all that's going on nationally. And many times we can find ourselves not sure of what to say because while what's going on is hugely significant to us personally, it can feel trite on a global scale, and we don't want to burden other people with it. But then, in much the same way, when someone you care about is going through one of these crisis moments, we can struggle finding the right words to say because we don't want to mess it up. We don't want to say something wrong or somehow make too big of a deal or too little of a deal out of it. And so it's good for us to be reminded, while the conversation of what's going on nationally is obviously important, we can't lose sight of the critical importance of simply showing up for one another and being present for one another, for being willing to trust others with the reality of our actual lives and what's going on in our own hearts, and being willing to pay attention and come alongside others in moments of their need so that they know that they're not alone. And to embrace that even before a word comes out of our mouths, what sets the foundation for how we love is how we show up for one another.
Let me carry your burden. If something's not right, I will let you know. Like the paint that's drying on a heart that's broke. So let me carry your burden. Get you back on a high when you're feeling low. When the weight's too heavy but you won't let go. Come to me, my brother, and I will sit with you a while. Pretty soon I'll see you smile, and you know you will. No matter how much you're hurting right now, you know that everything will change in time. So let me carry your burden. Let me carry your burden. When your heart's on fire but your mind is cold, and you're finding flames that won't keep you warm, come to me, my brother, and I will sit with you a while. Pretty soon I'll see you smile, and you know you will. No matter how much you're hurting right now, you know that everything will change in time. Let me carry your burden, brother mine. Let me carry your burden. Come tomorrow, you'll be right as rain. It'll quench your fire, wash away your stains. Come to me, my brother, and I will sit with you a while. Pretty soon I'll see you smiling, you know you will. No matter how much you're hurting right now, you know that everything will change in time. I just might see in another light. I've got no dog here in the fight. I can carry your burden, brother mine.
There are about 171,000 words in the English Oxford Dictionary, and this number fluctuates according to language usage, the creation of new words, recent additions like words like selfie and YOLO and adulting. Language is alive. It's always growing. It's always changing. An average adult English speaker will use about 20,000 active words in their vocabulary. These are words that we use on a somewhat regular basis. And we have about 40,000 passive words in the adult English speaker's vocabulary. These are words that we use kind of occasionally. So that means that an average adult actively uses only about 11% of the vocabulary available to him. The average English-speaking adult will say around 860,341,500 words total in our lifetime. So we have to keep in mind too that this number was determined back when people called each other on the phone rather than texting or messaging each other. This was also pre-COVID times. So currently the average verbal communication of an average English speaker is probably much lower today. But regardless, when you really think about it, we really do limit our verbal communication. Most of us take the ease of which we use language for granted because speaking is so commonplace. I mean, a person who does not use language in a culturally normative way is easily recognizable. Maybe a person has an accent that's different from the majority, or maybe they have difficulty speaking or an impairment in speaking that makes them stand out from the larger group. I mean, part of President Biden's own story is a speech difficulty that he overcame, and he still says he has to work through that sometimes. The middle of my sophomore year of high school, my family moved from the San Francisco Bay Area all across the country to rural Middle Tennessee. Now, I had family from South Texas, from Oklahoma, from the South, so I thought I knew about accents. However, when we got to Tennessee, one of the first places we stopped was a Taco Bell. And as we went in, the worker there asked if we wanted hadamah sauce with the order. And this accent was so different than what we were used to hearing that I could not understand what we were being asked. Hadamah sauce. We were baffled. My brother and my dad and I could not figure out. And so we finally just left. And it wasn't until we got home and repeated the sounds of this over and over again, hadamah, 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 that we realized that she was asking if we wanted hot or mild sauce with our tacos. And we got neither because we simply didn't understand, because the language diversity was so great. Fun fact about North Carolina, did you know that North Carolina is the most language diverse state in the United States? We've got Southern accents and Tidewater and Appalachian accents, just to name a few. And we know that not only in North Carolina, but all over the world, social and historical scientists understand that it's not really until you understand a culture's language, until that's unlocked, that you're able to understand who a people really are or who they really were. We also know that language doesn't necessarily mean that it translates across cultures. So for example, Pepsi once used to use a slogan, "Come alive with Pepsi." But when it was translated into Taiwanese, the slogan translated into "Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead," which isn't exactly the same thing. For someone whose first language is not English, they may not understand that when they're asked with the greeting, "How are you doing?" When it's said in a greeting, it's actually not an invitation to respond and tell someone how you're doing. In fact, most of us would say, please don't respond and tell us how you're doing. Regardless, though, of how well we hear, how well we communicate, how well we listen, we know that words matter. Not only are they key for understanding, they shape who we are, how we think about the world, how we think about ourselves. And they tell us culturally what to be proud of. That's our team. This is our hometown. They tell us what to be ashamed of. We don't talk about that. That's inappropriate. Look at me when I'm talking to you. We reserve specific places to talk about specific things. We all know that religion and politics are dangerous topics around the Thanksgiving dinner table. There's other things, though, that we say are off limits in certain places. Societal status of a person determines how we speak to them. Someone that's introduced to us as a long-standing member of the community will be addressed very different than a coworker or a boss or somebody we play pickup basketball with or somebody that we find panhandling on a street corner. Technically, words are really just small things, aren't they? I mean, they're just 26 letters arranged in certain ways and combined with other words. And then small tweaks here and there make up words. Then words make up sentences, and sentences have meanings. And meanings, these little words, these small things, have incredible power. And we all know the power of small things, of tiny things right now, don't we? We know the power of a microscopic virus that has turned the entire world upside down. This little invisible thing that has literally left us at a turning point in human history. Because now forever, there's a time before this microscopic virus and a time after it. What about the power of these two small words? Innocent, guilty. There's a letter toward the end of the New Testament that we call the epistle or the letter of James. And tradition tells us that it was written by the brother of Jesus, who was sometimes called James the Just. His name alone tells us a lot about the kind of person he must have been. James traditionally tells us that he wasn't a follower of Jesus during his lifetime. But after Jesus' death, he began to lead Jewish Christian churches in Jerusalem. He kind of took over for Peter in that place. Like any of us who've ever written a letter, James had a reason for writing the letter that he wrote, the letter of James. He was writing to a group of Jesus followers who were experiencing, unlike other people in that time, extreme hardship. Because not only was the Roman Empire a really difficult place to live as a Jewish Christian, there were also some issues about what it actually meant to follow Jesus' teaching. These were doctrinal issues. But mainly in this letter, which is just a few chapters long, James addresses ethical issues. He answers questions about how to practically live out one's faith. Like today, society at that time, where the people of this letter, the receivers of this letter were living, society was made up of haves and have-nots. It was made up of wealthy landowners specifically, and then everybody else who they paid to do the work on their land. Most of the people in the church James was writing to were not the people who owned the land. They were the people who did the work. Now, the wealthy were also religious leaders, maybe not in the church that James was writing to, but they were actively religious leaders in their local community. They were leaders actually in their community outside of religious circles too. And it seems like what was happening is that these religious leaders, these wealthy people, these landowners, were exploiting their workers that were recipients of James' letter, They were exploiting them in order to keep their own social status. What they were doing was taking these people, their workers, to court and using their power and influence to speak slander about them in the courts and to get verdicts against them. And they did this because they wanted to be more wealthy, but also they wanted to keep their social status, because in the Roman Empire, in society at this time, status was politically and favor driven. And it actually didn't take very much to push somebody down the social ladder. So taking people to court was working really well for the wealthy. But it led to some people barely being able to live a humane existence. And remember, the people doing this, they were the leaders in the churches and the communities. And they also were claiming to be people with strong faith. They went around talking about how important it was to live a good, faithful life. They were individuals who claimed to follow religious teachings that were common to everybody. But at the same time, as they were saying these things, they were going to court in public places and spreading lies to get ahead. So James's entire letter basically says enough is enough. His letter is about the ethics of faith. He didn't believe that you could be a person who simply speaks about faith and belief in good things, but you had to prove what you believe by acting upon it. Words had to be backed up by action. The proof of what you believed was in your actions. Not only that, speech directed how you would live your life. Now, this idea wasn't completely a foreign idea. The Hebrew word dambar can actually be translated both word and act or deed. And James spends a good portion of his letter talking about speech ethics, about the power of words. And one portion that I want us to read today is James 3. And this is what it says. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. So pause right there. James has given a little warning to people who want to be teachers, because many of the people who were in power thought of themselves as teachers, because teachers actually held the power of words. They told people what to think and who to follow. But James was saying, hold on just a second. Being a teacher is not as good as it sounds. Don't wish for that. And actually, just because you say you're a teacher doesn't make you one. And then James goes on to talk about the power of words. He says, all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body. It sets on fire the cycle of nature, and itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it, we bless the Lord and Father, and with it, we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. So James illustrates here the power of words with just a few, like what we might call mini parables. James calls upon first the power of the horse's bit, that thing you put in the horse's mouth to direct them. It's such a small thing. It's really only between like 6 and 7 inches. And while a horse can weigh between like 800 and over 2,000 pounds. But such a powerful, large animal can be controlled by such a small thing. Because where the head goes, the body goes. Then James gives us an example of a ship. All boats, kayaks, fishing boats, yachts, submarines, cruise ships alike, they're all pointed in the right direction by a small thing. The turning of a rudder or just the dipping in of a paddle. That small thing marks the direction of the entire thing. And then James gives a warning of the power of speech by calling the tongue a fire. Now, all of us know about fire, and we know that when it's used with caution, a fire can warm a home, it can cook a meal. But ask our friends living in California about the real fear of a tiny, misplaced spark. And although James is speaking in parables here, he's not mincing any words. What he's providing is wisdom literature. The word he says here, the tongue sets on fire the cycle of nature. The tongue sets on fire the cycle of nature. This one little phrase, when translated, it literally means words set on fire the wheel, the trokos of our life. In other words, words have the power to set the wheels of our lives in motion, to determine its trajectory, to change the course of our lives. And what comes out of our mouths has much to say about how we live our lives. Controlling what comes out of our mouths is a very good start in controlling what we do. In the New Testament book of Luke, we read this great verse that we might have all heard before. It says, "From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." Basically, you can know a lot about a person by what they put their hearts into, what moves them to action, where they place their money, where they spend their time, what they put their passions into. But Luke and James, they both agree that the best way to tell what is on the inside of someone is by what comes out of someone. If what they say matches what they do. Two opposing things cannot come from the same source. One of them is going to ultimately overpower the other. Salt water is always going to overpower fresh water. Or to bring it a little bit more home, since we're not surrounded by salt water, although we might love to be, one tiny drop of poo in the well, and nobody's drinking that well water. We've all experienced how quickly a few small words can permanently break trust. Or on the other hand, how they might build a friendship. And on the surface, what we're hearing in James's letter is quite simply just a practical teaching. His readers are poor. His readers are those who don't hold power. His readers are those whose only weapons are that of the tongue, and who have experienced the destructive power of the tongue from those who are in power over them. James is noting that power, and at the same time acknowledging the power that his readers also have with each other. And James reminds us that the power of the tongue cannot be underestimated, because in fact, it's the most powerful part of all of us. Because in language, in words, the tongue, this small muscle in our mouths, connected to the parts that create sound, is the power of creation, the power of destruction, and the power of construction. If we go all the way back to the first chapters and the first books of the Christian Bible, the book of Genesis, we get this imagery of God creating the world through God's speech. And in this story, God says, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God says, "Let the waters be separated from the heavens." It happens. And God says, "Let there be creatures on the land and in the air and in the sea." And it happens. And then God says, "Let us make humankind in our image." And another account of the same story says, God used their breath from their mouth to breathe into humanity the breath of life. God used speech, the power of word, to create something from nothing, to speak the world into being. There was chaos, God spoke, and there was order. And later, we have Jesus being called the Word, the Creator, the Speaker of life, the Word becoming flesh. And then in this Genesis story of creation, it goes on to say that God gave the power of the tongue, the power of speech, to Adam, the representation of the first of humanity. And God asked Adam to use the power of his speech to name all the creatures on the earth. And then when Adam uses that power, the animals on the earth go from having no identity to having full identity, from being no names to being names. And that's the power of words. That creation power didn't stop then. We all hold the power of creation and destruction in our mouths. Author, theologian, retired priest, Barbara Brown Taylor, one of my favorites, calls this, or says that we are all creators of worlds. So think for a minute about how your own personal world has been shaped by words. How many of us have words or things that people have said to us as markers for our memories? I mean, I know I do. I remember so many things that have been said to me that have changed how I view myself, how I view the world. Things like, you're not old enough. You're too old. You're underqualified. You're overqualified. You qualify. We need more curves. You have too many curves. Well, you're a woman. But you're a woman. You're not what we're looking for. You're exactly what we're looking for. I know you can do it. I'm sorry. Will you marry me? Happy Mother's Day. I'm still here. Please don't contact me again. I love you. My list is endless. And I'm sure yours is too. And we could all add to it whole encounters from our past when we wish we had said that one thing differently, or we would have said it in one way to somebody, or we wish we could take that one thing back that we said. Think about the power of creation that those words have had. What about these words from history? We the people. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The sun is immovable. Ain't I a woman? One child, one teacher, one pen, one book can change the world. That's Malala. What about give me liberty or give me death? We hold these truths to be self-evident. I have a dream. And we can dismiss these words as being just things said by powerful people or talented people or influential people. But it is not the case that only people who seemingly have a platform have the power of creating worlds with their words. Words are a power we all have. We are creators of worlds from our words. The question is, what type of worlds are we building? The power of words cannot be underestimated. And words can't be unheard or removed. Like my grandma used to tell me, once something is said, it can't be taken back. And we know how true that is, and how horrible that we all have to learn that from experience before we believe it. And we know that words no longer just exist in the auditory, right? Words now permanently inhabit public spaces. And we've always been told that when you say something, it can't be unsaid, but now things that we say in our virtual lives can also be screenshot and reposted and printed. Our words still always have the power to ruin friendships and break trust, but now they can do it in a cybersecond. And actually, this isn't a modern phenomenon. You might have heard of this ancient city of Pompeii, city near Naples, Italy, that was buried in 79 AD by ash from this nearby volcano. And because of the ash, the city has been remarkably preserved. And throughout the decades, archaeology continues to uncover more and more and more about it. We learn more about the people there. And one thing that has survived, that has helped us understand people of the city, is graffiti. The graffiti of the people, the things that they wrote about on the walls of the city. And they wrote about all kinds of things on the walls. They wrote love notes and insults. They wrote things like we would, like so-and-so was here. They wrote explicit comments. They also were food critics. They wrote about how horrible the food or drink was in a particular place. And the words of those people have survived since 79 AD. And now we read them today. And my grandma had no idea how true her words were. What goes on the internet stays on the internet. What goes on the walls of the city stays on the walls of the city. What we say to someone stays with them. And that's the crazy thing about words. They don't even have to be carved into an ancient city wall. They have an insane ability of imprinting on our minds and working their way into repeat. And if we let them, they shape who we become. And our words they're also shaping other people, creating their worlds as well. All of us know that over the past couple years, particularly over the past several months and weeks, we have witnessed in real time this power, both the positive and the negative power of words. Negatively, we have watched words turn into fire, and false reality was spoken into existence as a reality that was built on lies, that was fed anger and fear and fanned flames of hatred and white supremacy and even more fear into a world that moved people from just hearing words into creating worlds, false worlds for many people. And this false world, we know, led to an attack on our country's highest offices and ideals and was an insurrection on our capital. On the other hand, on Wednesday, we witnessed a 22-year-old Black woman descended from slaves give us words of hope and call for unity and call for change. One side falsely said words like fraud and stolen and fight. And Amanda Gorman's words were, "We will rise, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." Two very different sets of words that set wheels of life into motion in two very different directions. Their words created worlds. What worlds are our words creating? Are we creating from them swords, or bridges, walls, tables? And when we think about this, we have to ask ourselves what cultural and social power our words hold simply because of who we are, who we were born into, our gender, Do we have power with our words because of our economic status, because of our race, because of our social position, because of where we live? These things give even more power to our words. We have to ask ourselves, how will we use this power that we have? Because we will find ourselves with creation choices. The writer of Luke might call these heart examination moments, when we're given a choice of what world to create or destroy. And this might be a situation we find ourselves maybe offended by the words of someone else, either written words or spoken words, and we have the power to determine our response. James would remind us of the horse's bit. He'd remind us of the ship's rudder, of the fire. And he would likely suggest that moments like those when we're offended are times to be slow to speak, to take a break before we decide if being right is more important than being in relationship. Or we might find ourselves in a situation when we have to ask ourselves if justice is being denied someone, and if we need to use our words to help create a more just world, if we need to speak up. If our not speaking up is what Martin Luther King Jr. might refer to as justice denied. Or perhaps we might find that we need to give our word space to someone who doesn't often get invited to use the power of their own words. Because the power of the tongue doesn't stop only with what we say. There's also power and wisdom in knowing when not to speak. Worlds are also created when we choose to give the words of others priority over our own. When we choose to listen more than we speak. Choosing to hold our tongues can say very loudly that what you have to say matters to me. Or, probably more often, we're going to be in situations when we have the opportunity to create worlds for those we care about. What words are we saying or not saying that are going on somebody else's memory list that will help create the world that they believe about themselves? So for example, there's a difference in the words, "that's wrong," and "tell me more about that." There are different worlds created when we choose words like "I believe you" over "what's wrong with you." Or when we choose words like "I'm sorry," "I was wrong," "please forgive me," over words like "I told you so." These are words of creation and destruction. And according to James, the tongue starts the wheel that steers our lives. And I gotta be honest, I have no answers on how to do this perfectly, because at the very beginning of James' passage, if you remember it, James very clearly says, none of us are perfect. And I absolutely do not have this right. But I do notice in myself that the last few months I have been watching worlds being created. Worlds in the lives of our country, in the lives of my children, in the lives of my friends, in my own life. And I can't stop this image of the tongue as fire, the tongue as co-creator with God. This image runs through my mind. And so my only takeaway for us today is take some time to reflect. To reflect on what realities have allowed you, what have you allowed into your own world? What worlds have you allowed to be created for you because of words that were given to you? What word power do you already possess because of who you just naturally are, or where you live in the world, or your positions? And then what worlds are we helping to destroy or create with the power of our words? As we go into our week thinking about these things, I just want to offer one final prayer from the Psalms. It's Psalm 19, 14. And it says, "Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our heart be pleasing to you, O God." Amen.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.